Welcome to the Oklahoma Autism Center. My name is Tara Warwick. The purpose of today's video is to provide you with tips for de-escalating challenging behavior. The first thing that we need to think about is our perceptions of the behavior. Think about when you do see behavior starting to escalate, think about it that students are doing the best they can with the tools that they have. Think about yourself as a tool for helping the student de-escalate, even when the behavior is severe. Behavior might be the only way this student can get a need met, and you might be the only tool that that student has to help that student de-escalate. Try really hard not to think about this behavior as an intentional choice. Even when they're smiling at you or they're laughing and they seem happy about it, believe me, if they had any other tools in their toolbox, they wouldn't do this behavior. This is a great visual to represent the stages of escalating behavior. Remember that our goal for students is to not get to that acceleration or peak stages. The majority of the work we need to do is before the behavior by putting those preventative strategies in place, as well as focusing on those skills that we need to teach them to do instead of the behavior and how to communicate when they're getting upset. Also remember that when students are at a 4 or a 5, it's not a time to rationalize with them. It's not a time to teach them a new skill, and it's also not a time to reprimand them. Our job at that point is to help them find ways to de-escalate. Some things that's really important to know before we get into these tips is, first of all, we have to know what are those signs of escalation. Consider asking the family, asking maybe the student themselves, asking other teachers or therapists, or maybe paraprofessionals. What are those signs that you see that indicate that that child is starting to escalate? It could be a simple sign as maybe he puts his head in his sweatshirt. Maybe she just starts checking out. Maybe she stops answering questions or making choices. So the more that we know those signs of escalation, the better prepared we can be to help them de-escalate. Also knowing what are some potential triggers. Asking team members that. What are things that you know most likely will trigger an escalation in behavior? Maybe it's when they're told no. Maybe it's when we take something away. Maybe it's, certain days of the week that are harder. Also knowing what are potential reinforcers. What are things that the child likes? We can use this as we're trying to de-escalate the child in distractions. So really making sure that we know what are the things that the child enjoys. The other thing that you're going to want to make sure you know is if there's a behavior intervention plan in place. If there is a behavior intervention plan in place, make sure that you're well aware of what it says and what are the recommendations in that behavior intervention plan. So first of all, thinking about when behavior in the early stages of escalation. Okay, this is when, like I said earlier, when you see those first subtle signs that the student is about to escalate. Okay, like I said earlier, it might be they put their head in the shirt, and maybe they stop responding to questions, maybe they start roaming around the room, maybe they move work off their desk, maybe they stop doing their work, maybe they ignore your instruction, and maybe some students just appear to check out. Okay, the goal during this time is to prevent the child from escalating any further. So here's some tips on how to do that. The first thing is thinking about where you're at. Okay, so making sure that even though you're starting to get more stressed, try your best to act calm even if you're not. Try to put on a good front, a solid front for that child, because they are looking for you to provide that stability. Okay, make sure you're thinking about the words that you're using. Really, as soon as you're starting to see some signs of escalation, limit the amount of words you're using. Also, watch your body language and your overall affect, because they might be reading that and seeing stress in you, which is in turn going to cause more stress in them. Number 2, give a choice. So try at this point to not ask open-ended questions, because those open-ended questions might cause them a lot of stress. Instead, think about giving them some choices. So maybe it's, do you want to take a break on the rug or in the break room? Do you want me to do the first problem or do you do the first problem? Do you want to take a walk to PE room or to the music room? Okay, so anytime you can give them a choice, it makes it easier for them to answer you. And when if they are able to answer a choice, that means that they're probably starting to de-escalate a little bit. Some kids do a lot better when they can draw or write out their frustrations. So giving them a choice on that. Of course, you have to know your students to see if they'd be able to do this or not. But having them write out why they're upset or maybe what you could do to help them, still make sure that you limit your verbal interactions. However, maybe providing them with a dry erase board or maybe providing them with a visual map, something where they can outline what it is that's frustrating them. Because so many kids, so many people in general, when they're able to communicate that they're frustrated, it automatically starts making them feel better. So having them maybe draw a picture of their frustration or write down why they're upset can be a great strategy for de-escalating behavior. Another one is to try some distraction. Okay, so I recommend that you use distraction when needed, but if you're finding yourself using distraction for every single time, you really need to rethink your plan. However, when you're in that situation where you are stuck, try distraction. So making sure when you're using distraction, you're not asking them to do something, so you're not trying to get them to interact. You are just trying to get their mind to think about something else. So maybe if you're in the room with the student, you are starting to talk about something they really enjoy. So maybe if they're really interested in basketball, you start talking about the basketball game that you watched the other night. Not talking it in a way that you're wanting them to respond, but that you're just talking about it out loud. Or you maybe bring out your phone and you start looking at some interesting videos on your phone that they might find. Maybe you pull out a magazine or a book, that you start opening and just reading through and looking at, where the student can start maybe thinking about something else, thinking about something happy. So distraction can work in these situations. Another thing is just affirming their feelings. Okay, even if you don't agree with why they're upset, or even if you think that they were in the wrong, don't say that. Affirming their feelings and saying, I'm sorry that you're upset about this. You don't have to agree with what they did or what they're just upset about, but you can just affirm that you're sorry that they are feeling sad or mad right now. If they were able to write or draw, you can use that and you can say, I can see that you are frustrated because you got out in dodgeball. Let's think of a plan for that. A lot of kids just need to be heard, and in their minds, they have every right to be upset because maybe they think somebody wronged them that we didn't see, or maybe they're seeing it from a really different perspective. So the more that you can understand their perspective and affirm their feelings, the better you'll be able to de-escalate that behavior. Another thing that it can be hard, but making sure that you're letting them talk without interruptions. Even if they are trying to blame somebody else or saying it's your fault, let them talk without interruptions. Because we know if they can talk through things, that they are less likely to escalate their behavior. The other thing is just saying, I'm here for you. I'm sorry you're upset, but I'm here for you. Okay, once again, at this point, we're not reprimanding them. We're not getting on to them for what they did. We're just saying, I'm here for you. I'm sorry you're upset. Okay, still limiting the words and using it in a really soft, confident way, but just affirming that their feelings. So if they de-escalate from here, so say you were able to catch those signs early and put these things into place, and then they were able to de-escalate. Okay, so the next step is really important because you don't want to quickly escalate the behavior again, and that can happen if you're not careful. So making sure you're modifying the expectations. So if it happened during a reading activity, don't necessarily completely get rid of the reading activity, but modify it. Make it really simple for them. Use any kind of visuals that you can to show them the expectations. Okay, because when you use a visual, it decreases the amount of verbal instructions you're providing, which can significantly reduce that the challenging behavior. Make sure that you're incorporating high reinforcement. Okay, so that child is having a rough day. On those rough days, you're going to have to use even higher reinforcement to help them through those days. Continue to limit the amount of words. Okay, because as we know, a lot of kids, they can seem like they are de-escalated, but then we put all those demands, expectations, and they quickly go back up to being at that peak again. So continue to limit the amount of words. Remind them that if they need a break, they can ask and take one. So making sure that we're keeping that option open for them in case they do need a break. So just to remind you, here's those phases of acting out. So say we saw the signs of escalation, we put those things in place, and then they continued to escalate. So maybe now they're up to the acceleration, the peak area. The first thing is to make sure you ensure the safety of children and staff. Okay, so do this by removing any dangerous items, try to attempt to get the student to a safe environment if possible. If that's not possible, then remove the other students if needed. Make sure that adults are not left alone with the student when an outburst occurs. So make sure there's always 2 people there with the child. The other thing is limit the number of adults involved. I've seen so many times where a child will have a meltdown and next thing you know we have 10 people there. Okay, that's going to cause a lot of stress in that situation. So making sure you're using the fewest amount of adults to keep the situation safe. Okay, the person with the most experience with de-escalation techniques should take the lead. Okay, or the person that the child finds as their safe person. Okay, in those situations, that lead person should be the only one communicating with the student. Okay, the other people are there to help with safety, to document, to do those things, but only one person should be interacting with that student. Because if that student is getting a lot of interactions from different people, it's only going to escalate that behavior. The other adult should manage any of the other students who are in the room. Number 3 is providing adequate space. Okay, the more we try to crowd students, the more anxious they're going to get. So try to stay at least 2 arms lengths away from the student to give them that space. If the child says stay away or back off, back up 1 step. If the student asks for more room, then back up a little bit more. Okay, try to avoid any kind of physical interaction with the student. Make sure you're showing open, accepting body language. So as I said earlier, our body language is really important in this situation. So try to hold your body at an angle rather than facing the student directly. When you're facing that student directly, it can cause anxiety. But when you open it up, it makes it feel like that student like the situation is a little bit more relaxed. Try to avoid direct eye contact with the student. That eye contact can feel like we are placing expectations on the student, so try to avoid that. Keep your hands open and visible to the student, so that way they see you as more approachable versus fisted and you're stressed, and that can appear more confrontational to the student. Keep your verbal interactions respectful. So once again, stay calm even if you're not. Verbally ignore as much as you can. So avoid comments such as no hitting, no biting, I can't believe you did that, those threats, those reprimands. All those things will only make the behavior worse. Avoid any kind of teasing, any kind of reprimand, sarcasm, or that angry tone of voice. They can read behind that, and so making sure that we're keeping it very respectful, and it's just about what do we need to do to get the child to de-escalate. Because as a reminder, the children are doing the best with the tools that they have. Keep your communication simple. Keep vocabulary simple and sentences brief and direct when interacting with a student. Allow sufficient time for the student to think about and respond before continuing and or repeating. So one example I have was I would, give the child a choice on a dry erase board. Do you want to do this or this? And then I would walk away and I would set a timer for at least 2 minutes before I went and interacted with the child again. When we get in those situations, it feels like time is going so fast. Well, we need to make sure that we're not approaching the student too often. So sometimes for us, we might have to set a timer so that way we are not approaching the child more so than what we need to be. Avoid assuming that the student is simply ignoring you. Okay? Deliver the message for visuals when possible. Okay, because once again, when you use visuals, it limits that amount of verbal interaction. And verbal interaction is what can cause those behaviors to further escalate. Remind the student of what to do rather than focusing on what not to do. So, for example, you might say first sit in your chair and then your music. And you could do this on a dry erase board or something visual, so that way they can see what they are supposed to do versus saying stop running around the room or stop hitting. Catch any opportunities you can to reinforce other behaviors. So it might be something like, thanks for staying in the room, or I like how you're taking deep breaths right now. Okay, any opportunity that you can have can help, once again, distract that student and start having them focus on those behaviors that you want to see versus those behaviors that we don't want to see. So then if the student continues to escalate after this, make sure you consult with your team on the crisis plan. Okay, so asking them what is the crisis plan that's in place. Make sure all team members have the appropriate training for handling crisis behaviors. Okay, there's different types of trainings that people can go through to handle crisis behaviors. And if you're working with a student who has these crisis behaviors, make sure everybody's getting the training that they need. Make sure there's at least 2 trained adults present when that behavior starts to escalate. Make sure that you're documenting when the crisis is over and documenting the antecedents, what happened before the behavior, what was the consequence, how did the student react. All that kind of information can help us further plan to avoid having this crisis behavior again. If you've done all that and the student de-escalates, once again, kind of like I said before, make sure you modify the expectations. Don't completely stop what you were doing before, but possibly just modify it. Make it a little bit easier. Use visuals once again. Incorporate that high reinforcement. Limit your verbal interactions and document what occurred. So in summary, if crisis behavior is occurring frequently in your student, make sure that you know the behavior plan. If there's not a behavior plan in place and that behavior is occurring frequently, there needs to be a behavior plan in place. Okay, if there is one in place and this behavior is occurring frequently, then the plan needs to be modified. So have a team meeting and determine how you need to modify the behavior plan. Make sure you're documenting. In these situations that can be highly emotional and just exhausting for everybody, it can be hard to see the reason behind the behavior. So the more we can document, the more objective that we'll stay. Stay calm even if you're not. Okay, I cannot stress how important this is children feed off of our behaviors. And if we can stay calm, even if you're really upset, it can just be a solid foundation for that student. Limit the amount of words. As I say, no, but you can't talk somebody out of a meltdown. Okay, what we can do are these other strategies, but the more we talk, the more behavior escalates. Think about, the big piece here is to think about the behavior as a way to get a need met versus an intentional choice. So keeping this in mind as you're dealing with challenging behaviors, that if the child had a better way to handle their stress, they would be doing it. So we have to really think that we are a tool and that we need to help teach children these critical skills and provide them with the support they need in order to de-escalate. Thank you for joining me on this training. I hope you got some helpful tips out of it and that you can use this in your students back at your school.